Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the sources you share, filter out the noise, and give you the essential, well-informed conversation you need. You've sent us a stack of truly incredible specific documents detailing the darker side of winter folklore, and we are going east and far colder than the usual holiday myths.
We are stepping way, way outside the tradition of Santa and elves. Even Krampus, who feels pretty predictable by comparison.
Right.
Today, we are deep diving into the Karakoncolos, a malevolent, utterly ruthless winter entity from Southeast European and Anatolian mythologies.
And I've heard it described this way. If Krampus is the moralistic punisher, the Karakoncolos is just pure, unadulterated winter chaos given form.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And what's so fascinating about the source material you all provided is that it treats this creature less like a ghost story and more like a practical problem to be solved.
Exactly. These aren't just vague campfire tales. They really amount to a surprisingly specific, centuries-old user manual for survival.
A user manual, I love that.
Yeah, they map out the rules, the hunting patterns, the weaknesses, and, the limitations that actually bind this creature. Understanding those constraints is literally the only non-lethal path through an encounter.
So our mission today is to turn this historical lore into actionable intelligence, a field guide for navigating what the sources call the 12 Nights.
And we have to start there. The timing and the geography are critical because its activity window is so strictly defined.
Okay.
We are talking about the period known as the 12 Nights of Winter, or Zemheri. This is the time of the dreadful cold. It spans roughly from the dead of December, usually Epiphany, and then it bleeds into early January.
And what exactly does Zemheri signify in the regions where this lore comes from? Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia, Macedonia. Sounds like it's more than just a calendar date.
It is. It's the spiritual and physical rock bottom of the year. Historically, these cultures saw Zemheri as the time when the world is most hostile.
Right. Isolation, dwindling food.
Exactly. Isolation is rampant, food stores are low, and the spiritual barriers between our world and, well, the darkness are at their absolute weakest. The Karakoncolos is just the terrifying personification of that moment.
So if you hear whispers or see shadows during Zemheri, you know you're dealing with a predator that has evolved to exploit that deepest cold.
You do.
Okay, let's unpack the creature itself. What physical traits should you be looking for if you're caught out during the dreadful cold?
Across the folklore, it's described as a small to human-sized goblinoid. The first thing that always comes up is the dark, often oily, matted fur.
Oily, huh?
Yeah, sometimes with patches of thick, calloused, almost frostbitten-looking skin. It's clearly built for maximum cold endurance and, minimum visibility against a winter night.
And the head is disproportionate, right? I kept reading that.
Yes, often way too large for its body. It's got this wide, lipless mouth, which is essential for its vocal mimicry. We'll get to that. And it's filled with these irregular tearing teeth.
They're not fangs, more like shredders.
Exactly. Not for stabbing, for tearing and consumption. And the eyes, they are its signature. They glow red or kind of sulfur yellow.
Which indicates a highly reflective structure, right? Like a cat's eye, but supercharged for darkness.
Perfectly adapted to vacuuming up any available trace of light. It makes them perfect for a nocturnal ambush.
Let's talk about its movement, because it's not just walking around. What do the sources say about its lower half?
Well, some accounts mention crooked goat hooves, others say donkey-like hind limbs, but the mechanics are always consistent. Powerful, unnatural jumping leverage.
So you can cross deep snow easily.
Easily, and climb surfaces, and crucially, move almost silently. If you're actually hearing it move, it's already way too close.
We talked about its senses being key to its success as a predator. The low-light vision is one thing, but its hearing.
Its directional ears are a huge biological advantage. They're described as wide and able to orient independently of each other.
So it can pinpoint sounds with extreme accuracy.
It can pinpoint the subtle shift of footsteps, the creak of old boots, even the vibration of you moving under a blanket of fresh snow. It's an apex nocturnal hunter precisely because it doesn't rely on sight alone.
And this is where the lore gets really dark, really personal. We have to talk about its origin, the idea of a cursed birth. So this thing doesn't just appear from the woods, it comes from inside the community.
That's one of the most disturbing parts in all the sources. The belief is that children born during those forbidden 12 nights during Zemheri, they carry this inherent seed of transformation.
So they're born human.
Born human, but the folklore suggests they are chemically or spiritually tainted by the deepest cold.
So is the transformation triggered by age? or something in the environment.
It's a delayed adolescence shift, often starting around puberty. The physical warping begins, the disproportionate head, the bones twisting, the oily fur growing, but the final stage is often the vocal shift,
The voice starts to fragment.
right? Developing that layered capacity for mimicry. Can you imagine a community constantly watching its own children, just wondering if this year the cold will finally claim one and turn them into the thing they fear most?
That level of intimate betrayal is so much more terrifying than a monster from the forest.
So, to be clear, what's its motivation? Is there any moral ambiguity here? A choice, maybe.
It's a great question, but the sources are overwhelmingly unanimous on this. It is purely, consistently malevolent.
No nuance.
None.
Yeah.
It's not protecting a territory or teaching a lesson about greed like some other folklore creatures. Its entire existence during Zemheri is driven by cruelty, by hunger, confusion, and just the chaos of the season. Its few rules are just tools to make the torment more effective.
Okay, so if we accept this thing is coming for us during the 12 nights, we have to know its tactics. And the first one is intellectual, the mimicry hunts.
Indeed. This is its primary way of drawing victims out. Its specialized vocal cords allow for the perfect reproduction of familiar human sounds.
Like what? A child crying, the voice of a neighbor, or even your own spouse calling your name from just outside the door. It leverages not just curiosity, but profound human instinct.
But there has to be a flaw. What's the intelligence we can use against this?
The sources, particularly some of the older Serbian texts, they mention a crucial technical flaw. While the voice is a perfect copy, if you listen with extreme concentration, there's often a faint mechanical rasp, a subtle glitch under the human sound.
But you'd need the presence of mind to even notice it, which is exactly what it's trying to strip away from you.
Precisely.
Then there's the other hunting tactic, the one that's just pure sadism and exhaustion, the writer's harvest.
This is probably the most visceral method. The creature doesn't just kill its victim, it launches itself onto the person's back, locks its claws and long arms around their neck and torso.
And then it just rides them.
It forces them to run. It uses panic and the threat of immediate death to fuel the chase, running them until they collapse from sheer exhaustion, hypothermia, or heart failure.
That level of calculated cruelty is unnerving. It's not just hunting. It's optimizing for caloric efficiency. It needs that metabolic rush.
Absolutely. It needs that warmth and that immediate burst of energy to stay active in the bitter cold. That's why it's documented as feeding on the warmest, freshest organs first. The heart, the liver, the lungs.
A high-temperature, high-metabolism fuel source.
Exactly, for its night-long rampages.
But its diet is weirdly selective beyond just warm meat. It's not a brute carnivore.
No, and what's fascinating here is its palate for human winter stores. It specifically seeks out high-fat, long-burning energy. Think salted meats, rendering fat stores, tallow-based pastries.
What are rich treats, dried figs, dates? These are the precious stores meant to keep a family alive through winter.
It's a direct attack on survival.
And it avoids specific things, which almost sounds like an allergy or a sensitivity.
Yeah, the sources are clear. It refuses raw grains, strong alcohol, and especially vinegar. We can speculate that these things disrupt some internal biological or magical equilibrium, but the most telling restriction is that it will never eat a cold or frozen corpse.
It craves warmth.
It needs the warmth in its food.
So, connecting the dots here,
Hmm.
this selective diet suggests it's not just consuming calories, it's feeding on something non-physical to survive those 12 nights.
And that brings us to the metaphysical part. The Karakoncolos actively consumes emotional states. Fear, confusion, shame, the mental exhaustion of being psychologically tormented.
An emotional metabolite.
That's a great term for it. That allows it to supercharge its strength, power its mimicry, and sustain its energy. Victims who escape physically still describe this profound, inexplicable weakness and partial memory loss, as if their inner resilience has just been drained.
So we've established physical confrontation is basically suicide. We need to fight it with wit, which brings us to its central structural weakness. It's binding to specific, almost legalistic supernatural rules.
Yes. This is where knowledge becomes your primary weapon. The most iconic survival tactic is the test of the traveler.
The tests?
If the creature corners you at a traditional point of decision, a dark corner, a crossroad, a threshold, it seems compelled to pose a riddle or a question.
But why? Why does a purely cruel monster stick to these social laws? Is it an ancient contract, a magical flaw?
It seems to be a structural limitation, part of its nature. It embodies chaos, but it has to operate within the cultural framework that birthed it. The rule is simple. If you answer correctly, or even more powerfully, if you invoke the right keyword, in some Turkish traditions, it's just the word kara, meaning black.
It has to let you go.
It is compelled to release you.
And this isn't a polite release, I take it. It's frustrated obedience.
Precisely. The sources describe visible irritation, a moment of snarling rage, but it must obey. The key isn't just having the answer, it's the confidence in your response.
Doubt or hesitation just feeds it.
It breaks the protective spell of the rule. The challenge is psychological. Your confidence is your shield.
Okay, that's the intellectual defense. Let's get into practical prevention. If you're preparing for Zimheri, what are the first steps?
The easiest one is group safety. The Karakoncolos almost always targets isolated individuals. The sources suggest a group of 3 or more is generally enough to deter it.
They just don't want to deal with multiple minds at once.
They lack the patience. Second, you have to fortify the threshold.
Threshold protection. So we're talking about the traditional deterrents that sound like old wives' tales, but the sources insist they work.
Absolutely. The protection relies on symbolic power and sensory disruption. Iron nails hammered into lintels iron is a classic repellent. Garlic and burning incense, they mess with its hypersensitive nose and ears.
What about the chalk markings?
Chalk or ash markings on the doorposts act as symbolic barriers. They force the creature into a kind of ritualistic hesitation, like having to count grains of rice before it can enter, and hanging loud things like spoons or bells disrupts its perfect hearing.
And if a traveler is caught out, you mentioned a surprising geographical sanctuary.
The water barrier. For whatever reason, biological or magical, the Karakoncolos rarely crosses running water.
Really, even a small stream.
A stream, a meltwater trickle, the edge of an unfrozen river, even a small moving natural barrier is often enough to create a reliable sanctuary. It seems the shifting nature of the water repels it.
Okay, let's go to the absolute worst case scenario, direct confrontation. What are the primary physical countermeasures?
Open flame. That is the answer. Fire is the primary countermeasure, not just the heat, which it can tolerate, but the light and the flame itself.
So torches, bonfires, iron lanterns.
Swinging fire in an arc can hold it back. It directly counters its core adaptation to the deepest darkness.
And second, noise and metal.
Exactly. Because of those hypersensitive ears, loud, abrupt noise is painful. Clanging pots, striking iron bars, ringing bells. It creates enough sensory overload to disorient it long enough for you to find a sanctuary.
Like that running water.
Like that running water.
If you're forced to land a blow, where do you aim?
The eyes. Always the eyes. They're oversized and reflective, making them intensely sensitive to any sudden, bright flash. If you have a lantern, hoist it high. Strike metal nearby to create a flash of sparks. Sun it, then pivot and run. You don't try to kill it. Survival is always about maximizing distance.
The sources also get into how an experienced hunter can exploit its limits, turn its own tactics back on it. Let's talk about leveraging that mimicry flaw.
Right, this is a clever trick. If you think one is nearby, don't just call out in your own voice. Call out to it in different tones, different accents, even different languages if you can.
You're trying to force it to mimic repeatedly.
You're trying to overwhelm its vocal mechanism until the mimicry cracks or glitches. That rasp becomes audible and it reveals its exact location. And that buys you crucial time because a discovered Karakoncolos becomes cautious, at least for a moment.
And how do you counter its exhaustion strategy, the rider's harvest, the one that feeds on your fear?
You deny it the emotional metabolite. You deny it the payment of terror. If you're forced to run, you have to focus on staying calm and mentally alert.
Controlled breathing, short sprints instead of just panic running.
Exactly. Focused movement toward a known sanctuary. The creature wants shame and hysteria. If the victim stays calm and focused, the feeding becomes inefficient, and the creature might, in frustration, just leap off to find easier prey.
Finally, we have the universal checkmate.
Yeah.
The one constant weakness it can't escape.
The dawn effect. The Karakoncolos is a creature of Zimheri, the deepest night. At the first hint of sunrise, its strength just plummets. Its aggression fades, its form destabilizes. It becomes skittish, uncoordinated.
And if you can't wait for natural light.
The sources suggest that even lifting a powerful lantern toward the eastern horizon can simulate this effect briefly, often enough to force a full retreat.
What a terrifyingly detailed rule set. So to summarize the core lesson from this deep dive, the Karakoncolos isn't defeated by brute force. It's not about bigger weapons. It's defeated by wit, by knowing its rules and by intense preparation.
Hmm.
It is the perfect embodiment of the fear and dread that comes with the dark, isolating reality of the deepest winter season.
And that connection to the cycle of the year is profound. The creature retreats at Epiphany or when the cold breaks, and it enters this torpor-like state underground, only to inevitably return the next year, driven by that same hunger, cruelty, and chaos.
A cycle of fear.
Which raises an important question, right? What is the repeated, predictable return of a creature that embodies the terror of the deepest, darkest cold tell us about the nature of cyclical fear? Human communities externalize the terror of winter as the Karakoncolos. So what modern-day winter warnings, be they climate-related, social stresses, psychological vulnerabilities, what warnings are we ignoring today that if we don't heed them will invite chaos and cruelty back into our lives in a new, unrecognizable form? Something to mull over until the next Zameri.